I'd like to introduce Paul Snyder, Chair of Transportation Design at the College for Creative Studies. He's an automotive designer and alumnus. Paul, his experience spans 4 continents and encompasses both exterior and interior development for a number of automotive brands, including Ford, Lincoln, Renault, Honda, and Acura. For Ford Motor Company, he designed exterior and interior solutions for the Taurus Sable and Explorer production vehicles, and later oversaw projects for the Taurus X, the Ford 500, the Ranger, and Flex production vehicles. Prior to joining CCS, Snyder worked at Honda Research and Development in California, where he was Assistant Chief Designer, overseeing production and concept projects for the Civic, Accord, Cross Tour, Odyssey, Tokyo Motor Show EV concept, and Honda ACX concept theme vehicles, as well as a 2013 Acura Vision theme. He previously taught transportation design and visual communication at Pratt Institute, as well as a range of undergraduate and graduate courses at Wayne State University. In addition to his work as a car designer, Snyder is an accomplished figure painter, sculptor, and collegist, having earned a Master of Fine Arts degree cum laude in Fine Art and Cultural Studies from the New York Academy of Art in New York City, where he has also shown his work. Please join me in welcoming Paul Snyder.
Thank you, Phil. So today I'm going to talk about transportation. I'm a transportation designer, and that's what we do at CCS in the Transportation Design Department. We're going to go through a project that we started about a year ago. Well, before we do that, though, I want to first give you a little background on the College for Creative Studies. So the College for Creative Studies actually started under a different name. It was called the Society of Arts and Crafts in 1906. And at the time, in 1906, it was the Industrial Revolution was basically happening. And it became sort of clear to a lot of people in the Western world that industrialization was also sort of dehumanization as well. And so the mission for CCS was really to bring back some of these humanistic values to the production of objects that we use every day, objects that exude care and a thoughtfulness for the human user. And that DNA, even though it's been over 100 years, that still exists in our veins. And I hope you find that to be the case in the presentation coming up. When I went through this slideshow last night, I noticed that this image has a lot of irony for today's discussion, given that most factories are going to be automated if they're not already, almost completely. So very interesting. So about a year ago, the Seoul Design Foundation approached the College for Creative Studies to be a part of a kind of global consortium of participants in proposing mobility solutions for the city of Seoul. And so we put together a cross-functional team, or a collaborative team, if you will, and we call it a holistic approach. Interestingly, what you guys are all doing here, robotics, is, and perhaps software engineering, is perhaps one component of the overall. I know in the prior panel, what was discussed was the need for legislation. Well, that's certainly the case with autonomous vehicles. And as you'll see, the more architectural, urban planning, and infrastructure planning that we can incorporate into grand visions for mobility in the future, the more interesting, the more efficient the solutions might be. So the initial research in the city of Seoul was basically they had a great mobility system. They have a lot of subways, but because they were designed and engineered about 50 years ago, they didn't take into account the rapid population increase. Young people are flocking to the city of Seoul. That's where a lot of opportunities are. That's where a lot of universities are. So the density on a per capita, per square mile or kilometer basis makes Seoul the 5th most dense city in the world. So the infrastructure that was created for it is out of date. And combine that with the CO2 load that all the vehicles emit in order to, move people around the city, and you have a very unhappy situation. So as I said, there's a good subway system in Seoul, but at peak travel time, typical of high-density cities, it's extremely overloaded. If you've ever been in a Seoul subway during peak travel time, or Tokyo subway, like Shinjuku Station, during peak travel, you know that it literally is, you're packed like a sardine. The platform conductors will push you onto or into a train in order to fit more people into it. So it's very unpleasant. I mean, literally, you have to choose where you want your arms. Do you want your arms by your side or above your head, or maybe you can read or something? It's pretty obnoxious, and it's not a pleasant journey at all. So, and then take into account the surface roads are extremely overused as well, or crowded, I should say. The amount of cars that are on one city block with one passenger in them would fit into one train car, but the train cars are overloaded as well. So they have an extreme problem here, and so they reached out to CCS, Delft University, the Royal College of Art, and Hanguk, I think, in Korea, to come up with some solutions. So green cars are only one of the problem. I'm sorry, cars are only one of the problems. CO2 is only one of the problem. But if all the cars on the road right now were green, you would still have a similar problem in terms of the congestion. So what we did is we got into the ethnography of the citizens. It's really important, as the guys earlier were saying, to know who your customer is, whether that be a business or individuals living in and around the city. So we got into a little bit of depth with each type of customer that might be using the system in Seoul, starting here with Mr. Kang, who is who's an executive of a chemistry company, and he would commute daily with a chauffeur, would basically pick him up at his doorstep. He would spend about an hour in traffic. Maybe he's reading the newspaper, maybe he's checking some mail on his phone, but generally not as productive as he could be given his position and salary. And then Miss Jung, who is a working mother of 2 teenagers, she needs to not only go to work, but also do the shopping for the family, take care of the home, things like that. So if she chooses to take the subway, the bags that she has to carry for her family from the market or wherever would be a very difficult chore to carry on the subway with her when it was so crowded. If she takes her car, which she has a car, then she's searching for parking for, I don't know, probably 30 minutes to an hour. They say, I think that the term, or not the term, but the number is 70% of cars on the road in downtown, any urban downtown environment are looking for parking at any given time. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's true. And then Mr. Park, who is a retired senior citizen, his kids live across town, so it's very difficult for his family to bring his children to bring his grandkids to visit him on the weekends, but it's also difficult for him to just travel a very short distance to the clinic to have his weekly checkups. He's bound to a wheelchair, so getting in and out of the bus is a very cumbersome activity. Mr. Kim is a young professional who, in his first job, can't afford to live near where he works, so he has to commute either by train or bus. It's not a pleasant journey for him. He would prefer to ride his bicycle, but because of the pollution and the traffic, it's very dangerous for him. And then lastly, Miss Lee, who's a student who's living with a few of her college friends, And she has similar problems. She has to take the train or the bus, which is very crowded and a very lengthy journey. So that's the ethnography, just sort of ethnography light, if you will. You could go into a full presentation just on the lives of people and what they encounter on a daily basis, whether that be the agony points or the very infrequent pleasure points as well. One thing I haven't mentioned so far is many of these citizens of Seoul would very much appreciate not only the ability to walk or ride a bike with fresh air and less danger, but just the ability to hang out in a green space or a park. So we've come up with the double street idea, which is basically a layered urban network of raised parks and promenades above a automated road system within the city of Seoul itself. You can see from this early architectural diagram that the idea is for the city to invest in an infrastructure that would create parks on top of the current road system, and in doing so have a much more efficient road system operating above the subway system now. Here's a dimension diagram of what we're talking about. The idea was to lower it just a little bit, but to not interfere with the subways below, while at the same time creating a parkway that was low enough and dependent on vehicles that were also low enough to operate underneath it. And the goal here is to not create a cavernous, claustrophobic system of walkways around the double street, but actually integrate double street into the current environment so that the vistas across the top of it would be still very pleasant to walk and view the city. You can see here there's, in the center, those would be a 30-passenger bus vehicle, and they would be accessible from the center of the parkway or promenade. And the larger rectangular, or the next medium-sized rectangular would be a 6-passenger. These sort of cup-shaped ones would be 2 passengers, and the ones on the side are individual with single-passenger vehicles. So here's another shot of the double street. And you can see, because it's automated or fully robotic and controlled by a central brain system, they would be easily controlled in and out of congested areas. For example, if there was a sporting event, a major sporting event at a stadium or a musical concert that everybody was going to, the automated vehicle services could be just orchestrated to take people in and out very efficiently. This is a shot of the deck area where you could walk up. There would also be ramps for bicycles, skateboards, and of course wheelchairs. And you would walk down after you hailed your vehicle with your smartphone to capture it by the side of the road. There would need to be railings, obviously, because you wouldn't want, little Johnny to chase his ball into 60-mile-an-hour traffic. But so we're proposing 300 square kilometers of space within the city of Seoul to be incorporated into the Double Street project. And so now going back to the ethnography, Mr. Kang here would be picked up not by a chauffeur, but by his personal assistant in a 2-passenger vehicle that they can then begin their workday in the vehicle. The commute itself would be a fraction of the time it normally took if it was to be in the conventional road system. There they are on the highway, or I should say low-way. And then Ms. Jung could do some shopping at her lunchtime or practice some yoga in the parks above the double street system in order to have a very pleasant day, midday. And after she was done with her day, she would simply hail a single passenger vehicle with her bags to go back home. Mr. Park here You can see him getting in the wheelchair, or getting on the 6-passenger vehicle with his wheelchair. The illustrator who did these drawings, I asked him to make it a little bit lower, but he really thought that was a cool proportion, so he wasn't 100% on board with the whole universal access in terms of this particular vehicle. What's interesting too, though, is instead of a smartphone, you have your own personal drone that's sort of listening to what you're saying. It's got a much better version of Siri so that you could just talk to it. Bring me a vehicle. Okay. And Mr. Lee and Mr. Kim, they use a 6-passenger vehicle later in the day to go out and cruise around and go to the clubs or whatever they're going to do later on for their social life. Here's a view of the lower deck, just showing how the vehicles in an automated system, they might appear to be total chaos, but there would be an underlying logic to how they're all moving about, and there would be obviously vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure, as well as when they're outside of the system, that would be a fully autonomous experience, so that the vehicles could travel outside into the neighboring suburban residential areas, pick people up and bring them back into the system. The vehicles themselves, here's a layout for the single pod. Some cooler shots of it there. Here's the self-balancing 2-pod. You can see we're incorporating OLED graphics embedded into polycarbonate glazing, so that when the vehicle pulled up in front of you, you would know that it was your vehicle, your name would be displayed, perhaps your destination, so on. There it is with the door open. Once you're fully connected autonomously, you're obviously capable of connecting to the net and everything that enables. Here's the 6-passenger vehicle. People hanging out. There it is again, presumably further outside of the network. There's another shot of it down low. Another shot of the promenade, where you could pick up the vehicles that you've beckoned with your smart device. In this shot, you can see the center area where you could wait for a 30-passenger, more regularly occurring bus network. Obviously, it would be dynamic pricing throughout the day and relative to how much privacy you wanted. The more people you're willing to sit with, the less you pay. You can see the ramp there for the disabled. So double street plus fully autonomous vehicles equals a happy population. And that is basically the project. So there's the team. Again, I can't stress enough how important it is to have a collaborative team. The autonomous vehicles are one part. The industrial designers will deal with the ergonomics, the human factors, the interaction design, and the appearance, because it is a cultural artifact that operates in our community. We don't want them to look threatening or horrible or, or just, like toasters either. So we had Minky there was our specialist in Seoul because he's Korean. And we had a visualization specialist. We had an architect from UCLA. He's not pictured here because he worked remotely with us. We had some MFA students doing graduate study as well as undergraduate students. And interaction design faculty, industrial design faculty, and a mobility specialist, Dan Sturgis. And I just kind of put the team together and watched them work. So it's a privilege for me to be able to present their amazing ideas. And I think if there's time, I think we do have some time. There's a video that sort of is a great synopsis of the whole project. You can run the video now.
are living in a time that is overconsumed, overcrowded, and overwhelmed. Of cities with a population over 5 million, Seoul is now the 5th densest city in the world. The current transportation system in Seoul has a majority of commuters squeezing as many people as possible into subway cars and buses, with 58% of the population relying on public transportation. During peak traffic hours, nearly 70% of cars on the surface are only carrying one passenger, while the average subway train operates at over 230% capacity. The government is urging automakers to develop more electric cars to cut down on CO2 emissions. What about making travel cheaper, improving accessibility, or revitalizing nature? What if we could do better? What if the lifestyle of every Seoul commuter could be improved? What would that look like? Let's first imagine the experience of everyday citizens and see what they need. What if a busy executive and his assistant could be chauffeured by an autonomous vehicle? They could conduct a business on their morning trip. What would that vehicle look like? What if a grandfather, relying on a wheelchair, could once again access the city with his family? And in more comfort and privacy than a public bus. Such a vehicle could also be used for a group of college students to get around downtown. What would it look like? What if a woman who enjoys city life but misses connecting with nature could do both? She could spend an afternoon in a beautiful park and simply hail a single passenger vehicle whenever she chooses to return home. What if these new efficient vehicles are part of a network? A single-seat vehicle that offers privacy and efficiency. A two-seater self-balancing vehicle that offers a personal or business environment. A six-seater vehicle that is handicap accessible and perfect for families, groups, networking, or cheap public transit. Imagine this network of smart, automated pods replacing all of the slow-moving surface traffic. They operate below an easily accessible parkway that brings nature back to the city and freedom to walk, jog, skate, and bike as you please. Introducing the Double Street, a possibility not as far in the future as it might seem. All vehicles within the Double Street tunnel travel in orchestrated, autonomous movement. Stairs and ramps provide easy access to the upper park and lower level of this system, with room for shopping, vending, and information kiosks between passenger entrance stations. Best of all, we can give back space to nature. And the more harmonious the solution, the more we will all benefit. In this time of shortages and scarcity, shouldn't our efforts be to preserve what we already have? And make a bold and innovative step that addresses pollution, congestion, and quality of life? Instead of taking every step in a different direction, let's take 2 steps in one. Let's double our motivation to preserve, to lift up, and to surpass expectations. Let's double.
That's the video. So I might end by just mentioning that, you know, obviously we're fully aware of how expensive that would be and what a huge undertaking it would be. But let me just propose 3 potential ways it could be paid for, or at least contributions towards its expense could be accommodated. Obviously, if people are getting to and from work a little bit more quickly or considerably faster, the productivity of the population goes up. If the productivity of the population goes up, then you have an increased GDP. And if there's an increased GDP, then there's more money to spend on infrastructure projects. The second is perhaps one of the most important, and that is when there's an opportunity to move about your city in a healthy way. One of the other professors from Delft University introduced a term that I was unfamiliar with, and she called it active mobility. Active mobility is walking. Something that we're not so familiar with in the Southeast Michigan region. But if you could walk to work or bike ride to work or skateboard or whatever, you would be exercising a lot more. And if you're exercising a lot more, the chances of things like heart disease and obesity go way down. When that goes down, the social burden on unnecessary healthcare costs go way down, and so there's more money to spend on infrastructure that improves the lifestyle of people in the cities. And then lastly, of course, I think as we all know, we pay a lot of money for our cars, and yet they sit in parking spots for 22 of the 24 hours of the day. So this is kind of a heresy coming from a transportation designer, but the fact is there are better ways to spend money and better uses of the technology. Cars are incredibly complex, but they're also capable of driving from New York to San Francisco in a given day. Well, we just don't take those trips with any frequency to justify their ownership. So when vehicle sharing happens on a mass level, there are a lot of parking spots then available. Think about all the young people flocking to Detroit, San Francisco, LA, New York, all the mega centers of commerce and research and activity, but they can scarcely afford to live because of the price of real estate. If all the parking spots in San Francisco and New York were made into, one bedroom or just studio apartments, there would be a lot more efficiency in terms of land usage, and money would follow. So I'd be happy to take a few questions, if we have time. I don't know. Any questions? Yes.
So thank you. Do you
want a microphone?
I don't know if this is live. Is this live?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much. This has been really interesting. So can I ask why South Korea and why Seoul as opposed to one of the U.S. cities that are pretty congested? And I'm thinking, either LA is a big sprawling metropolis or some of the smaller cities that have really bad traffic. I live in Washington, D.C., and we're usually in the top 3 for bad traffic. So any reason why it was Seoul?
Yeah, you guys have it really bad. Well, we would love to work on a project for Detroit as well as all the other, cities in sort of mobility crisis mode in the United States. But the only reason we started this project in Seoul is because we were invited to do so. So the city of Seoul has, I wouldn't say visionary, but certainly open-minded leadership. And so they made a call out to the College for Creative Studies along with a few other universities and invited them and us to participate. And they funded the project as well. So that's really the only reason we started with Seoul. But, this is something that we'd love to do on a regular basis.
So anybody else in the audience have a question?
Hi, thank you for the presentation.
Thank
my
you.
question is, was the team required to come up with statistical data which proves and gives a number to the increase in efficiency for travel? How much reduction there will be and how effective it's going to be by statistical data?
Well, we were asked to come up with creative solutions. We are not a research university, however. So we did some ethnographic research on the lives of the citizens, and we did some tertiary research that we could find both in English and Korean that was available online. but to the extent you're talking about hard urban planning data and traffic patterns, we would love to collaborate with a university who has that capability, but no, we did not.
I think we have time for one more question. I'm sorry, I'm going to defer to one of our students. Oh, here you go.
So if this becomes successful in Seoul and Korea, do you think it will go internationally?
Yeah, I would love for it to go internationally. Basically, I think it's a really good idea. Some of the other comments that we received, this presentation has been given around the world, was, people love driving their cars, even though it's not always pleasant. Driving and being in commuter traffic is not the same thing. But I think that the need for it is certainly international, and I think it could definitely be exported to whatever country or city was interested in doing it. Bill Ford at a mobility leadership forum last year mentioned that what companies like Ford, and certainly Ford in particular, are looking to provide is a menu of options. So a company like Ford might provide the vehicles, but it would require a visionary leadership of the cities to want to invest into that, and they would have to do their own urban analysis of traffic patterns and traffic flow in order to make it work for each city with distinct needs for its population and geography.
Thank you very much. Can we have another round of applause?